Fraser, who'd have ever thought we'd have a Mercedes-Benz on a 1-tonne Ute Test?
Yeah, you wouldn't believe it, would you? But here we have.
It's very similar to the old Nissan up there, but it'll be interesting to see how it goes against all the
But Benz has done a lot of work on it, widen the track, all sorts of things, change the suspension a bit.
So it really probably brings it up to compete with some of the more popular cars here. We've got Hilux, we've got Ranger, all the popular Utes.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. I mean, with the Mercedes-Benz badge, you'd hope you compete with these things.
The real wild card's going to be the V6 Amarok.
Well, we know that's good. We've had it before. If the Benz can beat that, we'll see.
It's going to be an interesting couple of days. We've got some good loads to put in the back of these cars. We've got an on-road loop to do, off-road stuff here at Werribee. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Give them a good run out. Yep, absolutely. Let's get into it. The Ranger XLT. Last year, 2017, the Ranger was actually the best-selling four-wheel drive in Australia. A 3.2 litre 5-cylinder engine. Now you may think 5 cylinders sounds a bit odd and wouldn't be smooth running. Well, in fact, it is very smooth. Most notable characteristic is that really torquey at low revs. Hardly gets above 2,000 RPM. And you could say, well, why didn't Ford put the full-time four-wheel drive system out of the Everest in it? Shame they haven't done. At least with part-time four-wheel drive, it's simple and robust. People know what they're dealing with. Earlier today, we did a payload test on the Ranger. Nice long wheelbase makes it stable. Grunty engine means it doesn't have to rev hard, it's torquey. The way the suspension's set up doesn't really sort of feel the load in the back whatsoever. And you can drive it with confidence, unlike some of the others where you thought, geez, I've got a bit of a payload in the back, I have to take it easy. Ranger works well off-road. A fair bit of wheel travel both ends, which is the first starting point of any off-road vehicle. It's got a good traction control system, and importantly, when you use the diff lock, it keeps the traction active on the front wheel. The only negative off-road is a big ute long wheelbase, so the ramp over angle is not great. And sometimes when you're trying to manoeuvre it in tight situations, you sort of feel its size, but it, along with the Hilux and the Amarok's at the pointy end in this class in terms of off-road ability. Holden's Colorado, LTZ spec, so one spec down from Z71. This is the popular spec, this is what most people buy. This car went through a major refresh in 2016. Really, it's been transformed. It's a much better thing now. Electric power steering helps too, and it's low effort at low speeds. Firms up nicely at high speed. Rides better than before. It's a heap quieter than before. A lot of changes to the engine to cut down noise. Off-road testing earlier in this car today proved that it's very effective in overcoming the fact that there's not a lot of wheel travel in this chassis. The traction control is so effective now, it actually will do gnarly climbs that before it struggled out and just wouldn't do. Also a good load carrying car. A lot of that comes down to the fact it's a really punchy engine, 500 Newton metres of torque, which is only bettered here by the Amarok. So engine-wise, it doesn't really feel the load. Chassis does well for load on board too. In our load testing, it was one of the better performers. It wasn't the absolute best, but certainly up in the sort of top 3 or 4. Isuzu D-Max, 2018 model. It's been revised a little bit. Suspension changes to the leaf springs at the back, which has bumped up the GVM a little bit. This engine's got a really good name for reliability. Actually, it's often called the mechanic's friend because it's the simplest and easiest to maintain. It's okay off-road, but it's not a great off-road performer, simply because it doesn't have a lot of wheel travel in this platform, and the there's no diff lock, and the calibration of the traction control, while it's okay, is not fantastic, but that doesn't mean you can't do most recreational four-wheel driving, and the benefit of having a simple, reliable powertrain counteracts the fact that it may not be the most capable four-wheel drive. Load test earlier in this car too. While it carries that weight easy enough, it doesn't do it as easy as others. So it's a balance with this car. You're not buying the pointy end of performance in really any sphere, but you have got reliability and you've got low running costs and a fairly reasonable purchase price. Mazda's BT50, close relation to the Ford Ranger, essentially the same 5-cylinder, 3.2 litre turbo diesel, same 6-speed automatic, same drivetrain. So they drive a little bit differently. I mean, the changes they did to the Ranger make it a better thing, but it's not a huge difference. What you do get with this car is a lot lower sticker price, so that while you may be getting 90-95% of what the Ranger does, you're paying a lot less for it. Off-road testing earlier today in the Mazda BT50 proved that we've always known that it's a very good car off-road. It's not in the absolute top echelon in the class. Why it's not quite as good as the Ranger is when you use the rear locker, when you engage the rear locker on this car, it disengages the traction control on the front axle, whereas the Ford keeps it active. With our load test earlier today, 900 kg total, you hardly feel the load at all. I mean, even with that load on board, you'd almost drive it like it's unladen. And the engine's very torquey and grunty, so it doesn't have to rev hard to carry the load. So it's pretty well as good as you get in the class in terms of carrying a major load. Mercedes-Benz new X-Class Ute. Starts life as a Navara, but Mercedes-Benz engineers have pulled the thing well and truly apart and stuck it back together with a whole lot of redesign, wider track, wider body, completely different interior. Powertrain's basically the same, so that means 2.3 litre bi-turbo engine, 7-speed automatic, nice powertrain, does the job. Mercedes development and work on it has made it a lot quieter and more refined. It actually doesn't feel like a Navara anymore. Rides a bit more softly. You know, the starting point and where they've got to, they've done a good job. We also carried pretty well maximum payload in this car. It was just a bit floaty, not too bad, but like a couple of the others here, if you want to carry maximum payloads, you can probably do better than this car. Earlier today we had this Mercedes off-road. The gnarly stuff, it's got a diff lock, and if you engage the diff lock, it keeps the traction active on the front axle, so it's a bit of a win-win situation. It has got enough off-road ability to keep most people happy for sure. This is Mitsubishi's Triton. Smaller than most other things, which in some ways is a disadvantage, other ways it's an advantage. It's a bit handy to drive in the city and all that sort of stuff, and it's more manoeuvrable. It's also unique that it's got what they call super select four-wheel drive, so you can run in two-wheel drive on the highway or in full-time four-wheel drive. What this represents is great value for money because it's the cheapest of the mainstream utes. But if you want a cheaper ute than this, you have to buy an Indian or Chinese ute. Today we've done a couple of things with the Triton. We've had it off-road. Good for normal recreational four-wheel driving, not hardcore, simple as that. It struggles in the really gnarly stuff. Medium four-wheel driving, fine, but it doesn't really have the wheel travel for difficult off-roading. We've had some load in the back of this too today, a total payload of 9 sort of 50 kg bit of gear, which is pretty well maximum payload for this car. Did it well, not brilliantly. It still did it, so if you have to do maximum payload once in a while, it will do it for you. This is Nissan's Navara D23 series, 2.3 litre bi-turbo diesel, comes from Renault, 7-speed automatic, conventional part-time four-wheel drive. This car's been revised actually a couple of times since it's been out, mainly for the rear suspension to help it with stability and front to rear suspension match. And how it is now, they've got it pretty right. It does most things that you want. Still doesn't carry a load all that well as some of the other things, but it's much improved from what it was originally. Off-road, it's a mid-field performer in this company. It has got a rear diff lock which helps, and even better when you engage the rear locker, it keeps the traction active on the front axle. And that makes up for the fact that it doesn't really have an awful lot of wheel travel. So in difficult off-road conditions it does work harder than others, but we'll get there in the end, mainly because of that situation with the locker and the traction control. A bit more wheel travel would make it better. It would put it up in the company of the Hilux and the Ranger and the VW, which are the best of these utes off-road. Hilux SR Plus. It's effectively a commercial spec car with sat-nav alloy wheels. New generation Hilux came out 2016, highlighted by an all-new 2.8 litre 4-cylinder diesel. Big thing about this engine is a lot more quiet and refined and more civilised than the old 3 litre. Now backed by 6-speed auto rather than a 5-speed auto. Otherwise pretty Hilux standard, part-time four-wheel drive, live axle at the back, independent front suspension. Earlier today we put a lot of payload in the back of this Hilux. Did it pretty easily really, but it didn't sag too much to the back, the steering was nice and positive. You felt the weight a little bit with the power, because this is not the most powerful thing, but really quite effortless. I mean, you could drive all day with that sort of payload on. And off-road, this is a really good car. The big thing, it's got heaps of wheel travel at the back, over half a metre, in fact more wheel travel than anything in its class, and that's the secret to putting it right at the pointy end of all these utes in terms of its four-wheel drivability. The only glitch in that is when you engage the rear locker, it cancels the traction on the front axle, which means you're actually better off most of the time without the rear locker engaged. Amarok Sportline V6. It claims 165 kilowatts, 180 kilowatts on overboost with 550 newton meters of torque, which puts it comfortably at the front of the pack in terms of power and torque. Nice ride. Feels smaller than what it is. It's actually got the widest cabin of any of the utes, but it feels quite sort of small and nimble. Driving through an 8-speed auto and constant four-wheel drive, in terms of performance, it's really this ute first and Daylight second. We did a payload test on this earlier today. We had nearly 900 kg in the tray, which is getting pretty close to maximum payload. Power-wise, you hardly felt it at all. Chassis-wise, good, not brilliant, but sort of rode a bit firmly on some of the bumps. Off-road on paper, this thing hasn't got low range, so you think it's going to be a dud. The fact of the matter is it's as good as anything in the class, if not better. The trick is that with the 8-speed auto, you've got quite a low first gear, but the way the torque converter is calibrated, it effectively makes the gearing a lot lower than what it seems. A couple of other advantages: the center diff locks up automatically and also proportions the drive automatically, whereas with all the other part-time four-wheel drive utes, the drivers lock 50-50 front to rear, which means that when you're going up a hill, you've got as much drive in the front as the back, which you don't necessarily want. One of the most amazing things about this Amarok is you can go from going down the freeway at 110 kilometres per hour, turn off and head to the gnarliest track you can find and go straight up without touching anything. There is a diff lock if you need it, but really it's so capable without it. It's only in the extreme conditions that you need the diff lock.
Fraser, it's been an interesting few days out here testing these vehicles out. The rain held off for us, luckily. Just got a shower this morning. Yep. Mate, did it throw up any surprises?
I was really surprised by the Merc. Merc's engineers have done a great job with that car. It feels completely different from the Nissan. Off-road is a little bit better, but on-road is a completely different car. It's quieter, more refined, just feels more solid. It's, as I said, they've done a terrific job with it.
It's more like a Mercedes-Benz, a luxury car.
What you expect of a Mercedes-Benz, yep.
And that's pretty much the newest model here, but we've got some cars here that have been updated in recent years.
Yep.
How do they fare?
The big surprise there was the Colorado off-road. Previously it was a midfielder off-road. It wouldn't go up these hills and struggle for traction all the time. Holden engineers tweaked the traction control and it's really good now. It will inch its way up bit by bit. The traction control bites and goes up the next bit and bites again and does the job.
So couple that with the improved refinement and styling on that car, it's now a contender.
Yeah, it's a completely different car to what came out in 2012.
And what about the loads we put in the back of them? How do they all handle that?
Look, they all carried the loads, there's no problem there. Some did it better than others, but even the poorest performers still did the job. Some did it fantastically well, but they all did it.
So like always with these utes, they try to do everything, and it really comes back to what your needs are, whether you want a luxury car or a towing car and all those sort of things.
Well, yeah, family thing, an off-roader, that's right. I mean, they fulfil so many functions. That's why they're so popular, as we all know, yeah.
So it's horses for courses, and you're really spoiled for choice.
Absolutely, yep, that's it.